It's a Friday, and earlier this week, I got a complaint from somebody who commented under a video of mine and wrote, "People say Steve, people say Steve, people say Steve, people say Steve. Shut up. No, they don't." And I responded to that and said, well, you just said it 4 times. But he was complaining about the fact that I often do say, people say Steve, and then I say something. And that's usually in the setting where I'm talking about something I've spoken about before in general. And in response to the previous videos where I made a point, such as when I talk about people suing the police, people will always chime in and say, you can sue the police, but the payments come from taxpayers. The police don't pay that money, the taxpayers do. And so people say that in response to what I said. So whenever I anticipate people raising a point that they've raised before, I'll often simply say, people say Steve. You're paying that money, not the cops. It's your tax dollars paying that money. And that's a more efficient way than saying, whenever I raise this topic, people will comment and say, blah, 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 blah. And I do get comments back underneath the videos via email, via Twitter, via wherever it might be, Facebook, and I get these comments, I get this feedback, and I'm attempting to be efficient. And what's funny is apparently it bothers some people because they hear a saying and they know they've heard it before and it bothers them. But the alternative is for me to say something such as, whenever I mention this topic, people will invariably say the following. Okay, look at how long that is, how much time it wastes. And I could just say, people say Steve. People say Steve. Someone suggested I get t-shirts made, kind of like Frankie say, but people say Steve. I might. But it's simply a matter of efficiency. And it actually is a faster way of saying it. If it bothers you, well, I can only say so much because people say Steve is just 3 words. And they're common words. And I'm not mispronouncing any of them. I'm not using any of them wrong. It's just that some people don't like me saying that. And I don't know why, underneath it all, why would somebody get so upset about that? And all I can think is that they don't think that anyone ever raises these points that I'm raising. And yet, if you go back and watch any video where I've said, people say Steve, and I mentioned something, I assure you it's something that people have said to me before. And in fact, I've had people actually say, I was just typing that comment and then you called it out at 10:12 or whatever, and they give a timestamp in the video where I said, people say Steve, blah, 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 blah. So I have to tell you, this reminds me of my time in radio. Because when I worked in radio, I used to read all kinds of articles and opinion pieces and think pieces about how radio operates. And the 2 most common complaints that people have about disc jockeys, at least that they used to have back in the old days, was number 1, they talk too much. And number 2, they don't tell me what song I just heard. And you should see that there is a tension there. Because if the disc jockey tells you every single song you just heard, you'd say, oh, he's talking too much. When he's mentioning songs you recognize. It's only when he's playing songs you don't recognize that you wish he'd talk more. But how do you as a disc jockey respond to that? You talk too much and you need to say more about the songs. So that's similar to what I encounter here because people do tell me that my videos are too long and that I repeat myself. And anyone who's taken a speech class would know that a properly constructed talk on any given topic starts with an introduction. Here's what I'm going to talk about. Then there's a period where you talk about something and you try to explain it as best you can in the time you've got. And then at the end, you wrap up. And part of your wrap up, generally speaking, is usually a conclusory description of what you just talked about. And so, for instance, I will always mention the title of the article I'm looking at, if I'm looking at an article, at the beginning of the piece and at the end. And I do that at the beginning so you know what I'm going to talk about. I do it at the end in case you want to look it up. And people say, well, you repeat yourself. You repeat yourself. Well, I do repeat myself for emphasis. For emphasis. And craziest part about all of this is that I will do videos and I will emphasize something in the video by repeating it more than once. And I will actually have people say, you're repeating yourself. And people will respond to that and say, if you don't like the videos, don't watch them. Like you're actually watching a video and taking the time to comment and say that you didn't like what was in the video, just literally shut the video off and go to another channel. There's other channels on YouTube. I'm not the only channel on YouTube. I don't know why. People have to announce that they're unhappy with a video. I'm unhappy. This guy repeats himself. Yeah, I do. And there's a reason for it, and I'm going to continue doing it. And I'm also going to continue saying people say Steve, because it's more efficient than saying whenever I mention this topic, invariably someone will respond thus. And so there you go. Also, I had a really strange correction yesterday where someone corrected me on something I said. And I was talking about Bitcoin. And by the way, this is a pro tip to anybody out there who has their own YouTube channel. Anytime you say in a self-deprecating manner that I don't know a lot about this topic, you have to be careful because people assume that you literally know nothing about the topic. And so I've mentioned before that I specialize in lemon law, and I've done some criminal work in my life, and I've also handled tons of traffic tickets. So if someone says, what do you know about divorce? I'll go, I don't know much about divorce. People go, oh, well, let me tell you about it. They start explaining to me, and I go, wait a second, what state are you a lawyer in? Oh, I'm not a lawyer. Okay, I know more about divorce than a non-lawyer. I'm just talking about there's other lawyers out there who know, I'm trying to keep this in perspective. And so I will occasionally say, I'm not an expert on this, and I'll start talking about it. People go, if you're not an expert, why are you talking about it? Well, I'm just acknowledging there's people out there with more knowledge than me. Quite often, there's a few of them in the audience. So I was talking about Bitcoin the other day and this, this cryptocurrency. And I often joke about crypto and Bitcoin and so on. And I've said I don't own any. I do not own any crypto or Bitcoin. And so, but I do know a little bit about it. In fact, I've watched a ton of documentaries. I've read a lot about it. But I also don't consider myself an expert because I know there are experts out there. And I mentioned one of the most famous Bitcoin catastrophes, which was the failure of a business called Mt. Gox. And think of it as MT like a mountain, Mount, and Gox, G-O-X. And Mt. Gox was an acronym created from the phrase Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. So those are the first letters of all those words except for the word exchange, where they took the second letter. So Magic M, the T, Magic the Gathering, G, Online, O, E, Exchange, X, Mt. Gox. And so I mentioned Mt. Gox. And in the story about Mt. Gox, I mentioned Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. And I actually had somebody respond to that video and say, it's not Mt. Gox. You called it Mt. Gox. It's not Mt. Gox. It's Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It's not Mt. Gox. And it's kind of like saying it's not scuba. It's self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. What's wrong with you? So I thought to myself, did I really confuse? Is there really like Mt. Gox and Magic the Gathering Online Exchange are two different things? But of course, if you look up Mt. Gox on the internet, it'll say this is the abbreviated name for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. And it is exactly what I said it was. But I said that in the video. And so the weird part is that people will be watching a video and they'll catch the fact that I said, well, I'm not an expert on crypto or whatever. And later on I mentioned Mt. Gox, and this guy's like, no, it's not Mt. Gox, it's Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. And you're the expert. Okay, just making sure I've got this right. And then I have to mention that I did a story yesterday, and there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of different variations on this story on the internet. And I'm talking about the people who were on the train for 37 hours instead of 16 or 17 or whatever it was supposed to be. But people were supposed to take a train trip from up north down to Florida. And the train got waylaid. It got sent off course because the train had derailed. They had to go around it. And it wound up to the point where the train stopped out in the middle of nowhere. And they interviewed somebody who was on board the train. And they were talking about how they felt like they're trapped on this train. And I mentioned that there had been a similar situation in Michigan last year where a train stopped in the middle of nowhere. It's a little different of a situation. Among other things, that train lost power. People were sitting in darkened train cars wondering when salvation was going to come. Several of them just got off the train and walked out and just left and handled their own lives. And I mentioned that did not happen in the situation in South Carolina. And I got a really angry email from a guy yesterday. He goes, Steve, why do you lie? Why are you so disingenuous? What's wrong with you? You purposely left out of the story that was an auto train. And I mentioned in the story that it was an auto train. I mentioned that. And the auto train, of course, is where you can take the train someplace and you put your car on the train, and then you get on the train, and you both go to where you're going, where they then offload your car, and you get off the train, and you have your car down where you are. At the end of your trip, you can reverse the process and not have to drive someplace, but you can sit on the train traveling with your car. So the family that we're talking about that was interviewed, the father was. It was presumably a husband and wife and their kid. There's three of them. And the guy who wrote me the email said, Steve, every single person on that auto train has a car. And they can't get off the train because then they'd have to take their car off the train. Two problems there. Number one, not every single person on a train has a car. The 5-year-old kid doesn't have a car, and the husband and wife have one car between them. Every party has a car. But are you telling me that if you had a heart attack on the auto train, you couldn't get off the train because your car's on there, and we can't take your car off till we get down there, so sorry, you're stuck? I'm pretty certain in an emergency you can get off that train. It's just what constitutes an emergency. And for instance, and again, I'm just thinking out loud here because that's what I do as an attorney sometimes with a camera pointed at me. If I'm on a train with my wife and my child and we are stuck someplace for 20 hours or whatever it was, you're telling me that I couldn't tell my wife and child, you know what, you guys get off the train, I'll stay with the car. Now, Amtrak might not like that, and it might not have worked based on where the train was, but we have heard of situations before where people got off trains. And no, you're not chained to the train simply because there's a car on there that's associated with you if someone could stay behind with the car. I'm simply thinking out loud, but I did not say any of this. All I said was it was an auto train, but these people felt trapped. And the guy who was going nuts in the email to me yesterday actually called me disingenuous, suggested I'm a liar, and says I left facts out of the story. Do you know what facts I actually did leave out of the story? I did. Several reports in the news said that people on that train called 911 and reported they were being held hostage by Amtrak. That was the actual words they used. We are being held hostage. They called 911 and they got the 911 operator in South Carolina who said, what's your emergency? And they said, we are on a train. It's stopped. Amtrak won't tell us what's going on. We are being held hostage. I left that part of the story out. And the reason I did is that was not in every story. And we also don't know if people who said we are being held hostage actually felt they're being held against their will or if they're saying that for hyperbole. I don't know. So when I read all the different versions of the story, and I read several of them, many of them before I did the video, I decided to leave that portion out of the story because that sounded to me like it could be over the top. Now, if somebody were to contact me and say, Steve, I was on that train, I was the one who called 911, yes, I thought, and explained it to me, I might say, oh, okay, I guess I should have included that. But I will sometimes take portions of stories from several different news sources, and sometimes I will leave stuff out when I'm not sure there's enough there to justify me passing it along. But the version of the story that I had did not contain the bit about people being held hostage. It did contain the statement that this was an auto train, which I included in the story. Now, I didn't go into an in-depth explanation of what the auto train was because it didn't seem to me to be a terribly important part of the story. But again, if Amtrak really says, you three people got on the train with your car, you cannot get off until the three of you take your car, even in an emergency. Well, if Amtrak's got that rule, then I guess I was wrong. But I have a sneaky feeling if the father who had that story and was talking to the news, if he had a heart attack and had to go to the hospital, I have a sneaky feeling they'd let him off the train and let him go to the hospital. And they would just simply go, okay, well, can somebody take care of your car? I suppose it's possible that the rule is once you get on that train, you cannot get off, because that's what the guy who emailed me said. He said every person on the train has a car, and they cannot get off without taking their car with them. He goes, so what you're suggesting is that they offload all these cars at the side of the train tracks out in North South Carolina, which I never actually said. So what's funny is how many people complain and will tell me that I said something that I didn't say because they imagined it, and then they'll accuse me of not saying something I did say, because I did mention that it was an auto train. I mentioned that, but I also didn't mention the fact that several people, because according to one news source, it was more than one. 911 got more than one phone call, more than one, from somebody on that train saying, we are being held hostage in the situation. Can you please send the police? We're being held hostage. So I didn't include that, but oh well. So there you go. Those are the two biggies this week, but three, I guess. But the main one here is the people who get upset when I say people say Steve, blah, 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 blah. And that's actually a shorter, quicker way for me to say, whenever I mention this topic, invariably people will comment thus. And I'm also repeating myself now. So there you go. But just to let you know, I've had several people mention to me recently, and they go, Steve, I just found your Vault channel. I didn't realize this thing existed. Do you put any new material up here? And I said, yeah, if nothing else, Friday is always a new video that does not appear on my main channel. So if you know anybody who likes my main channel and they're not here yet, please let them know. And I might mention it again on the main channel. But, we've got a neat little group here. I like reading the comments here. I've stopped reading the comments underneath my main channel. Almost never. Once in a while, if I'm really bored, I'll skim through them. But I almost always see stuff that just gets me so ticked off. I'm like, something? I've just got to stop reading these comments. And the other day, I was skimming through something, and I did the story. I'm trying to remember what it was. And I just mentioned the word Tesla. And the guy goes, oh, so you didn't stop and bash Tesla for 20 minutes like you always do? And I honestly think some people confuse me with someone else. And I have had people send me a note, whether it's underneath a video or via email or something, and they'll say things like, well, in that video you did about such and such. And they'll mention a video I never did. And I go, which video are you referring to? And they go, the one where you talked about, and I go, no. Can you go on my channel and find it and show it to me? Because that doesn't ring a bell. And I've had people go, I can't find it. And I go, it's because I didn't do it. They're like, oh. So, and by the way, for the people who do communicate with me in an attempt to get me to do story ideas, I don't watch videos from links that are emailed to me. Every single day, I get at least a dozen emails containing a link going, watch this, with no explanation as to what it is, what it's about, why I should be watching it. And I've mentioned before, if I simply watched half of them, I'd be doing nothing else for the rest of my life but watching videos. And so I've chosen not to spend my time that way. So if you have an idea for a story and you found a YouTube video about it, find a print version of it and send me the link to that, because I can glance at the headline, I can glance at the body of the story and figure out if I want to do it or not. I'm not going to watch a 45-minute video and send you an email back going, why did I watch that? Oh, I thought it was funny. Oh, okay. I just wasted 45 minutes of my life. So there you go. But, people do say, Steve, you repeat yourself. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.